right, so thank you and welcome. My name is Dana Lewinter. I am the Director of Municipal Engagement here at CHAPA. And just give me a second, I'm going to share my screen so that you all can see our presentation. But as I was saying, as you're coming in, if you haven't yet, if you could just share in the chat your name, your organization that you come from, and something that or the community that you come from, and something that you're excited or optimistic about in the coming year in the housing world. So can folks see my screen before I move on? Excellent. All right. So we are here for our CHAPA regional meeting with Metro West. Thank you all for joining us. And I want to thank our regional sponsor, Bank of America, for making it possible for us to bring these meetings and these discussions to all of you. And I want to thank our participating co-hosts from the Metro West region. We will be hearing from all of them later, but we're joined by Housing for All in Acton, by Metro West Collaborative Development, and the Regional Housing Services Office today for this session. So thank you all for helping us think through this region and speaking later. So just a little bit about CHAPA for those of you who may not be as familiar with us. We are a statewide affordable housing organization. We encourage production and preservation of homes that are affordable to households with low and moderate incomes. And we work to foster diverse and sustainable neighborhoods through planning and community development. And for more than 50 years, we've advocated for opportunity at the local, state, and federal level. We have worked to expand access through our programs like the Massachusetts Homeownership Collaborative, our monitoring of affordable homes, mass access, and others. And we work to develop the affordable housing field through trainings, forums, the Young Professionals Network, and the mentorship program that we run with the Mel King Institute. And our work is to bring together a broad group of stakeholders because we believe that by bringing all of us together, we can really build a better future for the Commonwealth. This is something we've always been able to do in Massachusetts, shaping the future that we want for ourselves. But the affordable housing challenges that we face are really putting us at risk of losing what makes Massachusetts so great. And especially in this last year, the urgency of the COVID pandemic and the racial injustices have just demanded that we really rethink who we are and what we want to be as a Commonwealth. We know that the decisions we make today are going to determine our future. And if we do this well, we can ensure that everyone has an affordable home in the community of their choice. There's a lot of challenges we're going to be talking about today, but we want to hear from you because we know that our goals are achievable. So I'm really excited for our agenda today. We will be first hearing from our policy team about some state and federal updates and priorities. We'll also hear about CHAPA's fair housing efforts, our municipal engagement initiative model, and then we'll hear from our regional co-sponsors on the challenges and opportunities that they see for this region. And I've said it before, I'll say it one more time, we want to hear from you. You guys know your communities better than anyone else, so please share your challenges, strategies, and concerns so we can all learn as we go through this work. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Abby.
Hi, everyone. I'm Abhi Kurve. I'm the policy associate at CHAPA. And with our policy team, we work on building coalitions around specific issues and advocating for those solutions to those issues through state advocacy and with the administration to ensure that housing programs and all the solutions needed to ensure we have enough affordable housing supply in Massachusetts. So it's a little bit of everything. Going on to the next slide, I just wanted to give an overview of a really important, crucial zoning reform that went on or that got passed at the start of this year. We have been working on it for quite a long time, and it's one of the really rare changes to the state's zoning law 40A, which was enacted through the Economic Development Bill. The objective was to make it easier to approve smart growth to ensure, as we are talking about transportation and housing, that we are really looking at ensuring that housing where it is built, its transportation is accessible and that we are going into smart growth practices. And so it's basically providing zoning tools to cities and towns across Massachusetts so that they can address the housing crisis better in their own communities. This change applies to all cities and towns except Boston, who has its own charter. And the law is currently in effect. It provides certain zoning ordinances or bylaws that can be enacted by a simple majority vote, which was initially by supermajority, and that was seen as a huge barrier in terms of um, properties or developments that, especially those with affordable housing, to move forward. Next slide. So this law, housing choice, it basically it changes the zoning code of the state in three categories. One is, as I said, it brings down from supermajority to simple majority certain zoning ordinances. It requires multifamily zoning for MBTA municipalities. I can go over that a little bit quickly in the next few slides. And it changes permitting, making it more streamlined, and also addresses some abutter appeals where neighbors of a particular development could stop the development based on frivolous lawsuits. So it addresses that issue. So DHCD is yet to issue guidance. It has issued some preliminary guidance. I will be sharing those links too, but we are working with DHCD. They are having certain sessions where they are getting input from advocates around the state to ensure that the guidance that is coming out, which is very crucial for this law to be implemented, is done in a equitable way, and that we are contributing to that. So any inputs, please feel free to reach out to us or the MEI team. Next slide. So I'm not going to go through the details of this, but if you want to, these are just quickly the qualifying zoning changes that can be passed with a simple majority. It includes ADUs, multifamily housing in eligible location. This is where DHCD's guidance becomes very crucial, because what counts as an eligible location or a district with reasonable size, those guidance documents will they will make it more clear. And again, listing a whole list of things that can be approved by special permit. So I'm going to quickly rush through this. Thank you. Again, the MBTA zoning is a new statute, and so it requires that an MBTA community shall have at least one zoning district of reasonable size in which multifamily housing is permitted by right. So cities and towns do have ability to choose which district. Now, what counts as reasonable, as I said, again, is something that we'll be looking forward to the DHCD guidance. The great thing about this law was it did not just provide incentives, but also municipalities that do not comply will be ineligible for three things: housing choice grants, local capital project funds, and mass works grants. This does not go into effect till 2022, so communities still have some time before this section kicks in, but it basically is going to ensure that communities are pushed to get these zoning tools for development passed in their communities, or basically implemented in their communities. And so this is just a quick map of which are the MBTA communities. In the links that we can provide, there is a whole lot of information on what is an MBTA community and a list of all of those. So please look out for those. As I said, these are the links for that, and you will get a lot more information detailed on this on these links. Jumping into our affordable housing priorities, CHAPA works on the legislative priorities for new policies and laws, but also on resources to ensure that housing programs are well resourced, that there is enough money to make sure that we are putting out new vouchers, or it's reaching to many families that are in need. And so I'll just highlight three of the programs that we really advocate on. One is the MRVP, Mass Rental Voucher Program, which is, we are one of the few states that have our own state rental voucher program. And we are having a lot of discussions with the new federal vouchers coming in, and all of those things going on, but it's essential to maintain our state's program beyond the pandemic money and like all of the funds that are coming in federally. So we are going to be making sure that that program is well resourced. We are happy to see public housing being getting an increased funding. It was in dire need of resources, so we are really happy that that is getting through with the budget. Jumping on to our legislative priorities, we have a whole host of them because rightly so, to address the housing crisis, we need a plethora of solutions. It cannot be just one thing. And so that is what you'll see in our legislative priorities. Building on the housing choice or the zoning reforms, we are, the housing production bill was advocated by us. It builds on the housing choice reforms, makes sure that affordability is a goal as we are going through these zoning reforms. It makes multifamily housing by right across all of Massachusetts and not just MBTA communities, and allows ADUs by right statewide as well. And there are a couple of other things. Please feel free to check out the links for more details. The other thing was codifying MRVP as it exists now in the budget. This will ensure that it is established in a statute and makes it more permanent, and we are not going through every budget cycle to protect certain things in that program. Right to counsel. This is something that will help address eviction crisis. As we know, in an eviction case, there's a imbalance in representation for tenants versus property owners, and so this will provide legal representations for residents with low income who are facing an eviction. Next slide. Restoring public housing to create more resources for public housing redevelopment. Our public housing stock is at least 50 years old. They are in dire need of resources to rehab those properties, and this bill will help ensure that we are creating or leveraging new and additional resources for redevelopment of public housing. And also ensuring or creating revenue for affordable housing, because as we look at affordable housing units, we need numbers to make it work. And so this bill, which is basically a coalition called HERO, they are leading on this, and CHAPA is very much supporting this. That will help create revenue source for affordable housing development. And again, all of these things are something that we see go beyond the federal stimulus that is coming into the state right now. And so this would raise 300 million for not just affordable housing, but also climate sustainability. And so these are I just touched upon a few of our main priorities. We have a whole list of those. Please feel free to check out the links, and please feel free to join our committees where we discuss all of these things and the nuances of these bills to make sure we are getting your input. This is just a quick advocacy thing. We had a huge overhaul in the housing committee chairs, in the leadership of housing in the State House. We have 2 new chairs after Representative Honan moving on to bigger things. So we have Representative Arciero and Senator Keenan, and we are very glad to know that they are receptive to a lot of the nuances and discussions. So if you belong to their district, or even if not, please feel to reach out to them and express your concerns or solutions to housing issues. And with that, I will pass it on to Ryan.
Thank you, Abhi. So as my colleague has mentioned previously, there's billions of dollars that are coming in for federal relief funds that can be used for a lot of our housing priorities, but also to help us to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm going to go over one particular source of funding, which is the American Rescue Plan fiscal recovery funds. So as you may have seen, President Biden put out the American Rescue Plan, which you may also see referred to as ARPA, and that allocated around $5.3 billion to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, while there was around $3.4 billion that were allocated directly to cities, towns, and counties. And these funds can be used to support everything from public health, lost revenue, infrastructure investments, as well as housing. You may have seen that the governor came out with his plan for these funds, and that plan includes $1 billion for housing. There's around $500 million for home ownership and around $500 million for rental housing production. He just released it as a standalone bill, so that now there's a vehicle for the state legislature to now debate as well as add things to that bill so that we can get something passed and allocate some of the funding that went directly to the states. So as I mentioned previously, some of your local cities and towns and counties will receive funds directly, and you'll see on the next slide that Framingham specifically received around $12 million, and there are 2 county governments, Middlesex and Worcester, that are going to receive hundreds of millions of dollars. Obviously, there's no county government that that money can go to. So it's probably going to be allocated through the state, through different cities and towns. If you don't see your city or town up here, there probably are included in the non-entitlement community pool of funding. So there will be some funding that is going to your city and town. It's just going to be distributed from the state. But there is an opportunity for each of you as local advocates to, get involved with the process. And I think that it would be really just really important for you to reach out to your municipal officials and ask them to include housing as a particular use of these funds. Kind of moving forward, I know that the governor has put $1 billion of the $5 billion that were allocated to Massachusetts, which breaks down to around 20%. And yesterday we held a call with a number of advocates around the state to talk a little bit about these funds. And Dana had mentioned, that's 20% of the total funds. So if we can do the same thing in each of our cities and towns, we'll have a lot of money that will be going towards housing. So in terms of the eligible uses, you can advocate for your city or town to use the funding for rent, mortgage, or utility assistance, counseling or legal aid to prevent evictions, affordable housing development, as well as services for homelessness, including supportive housing. Throughout this slide deck, I've been including a lot of different links to U.S. Treasury guidance for all of the federal funds that I will be talking about. And that will give you an idea of all the different uses that you can use these funds for housing. And so I would recommend that you review all of these documents and use them as a resource for your advocacy locally. So moving on to some more other types of funding that is coming in. There are emergency housing vouchers that have been allocated to the state. And they're basically Section 8 vouchers that are specifically targeted to people who are experiencing homelessness, domestic violence, or housing instability. And specifically, DHCD has received 917 emergency vouchers. So if you know anybody who is experiencing homelessness or domestic violence or housing instability, please have them reach out to DHCD to potentially, get access to one of these emergency housing vouchers. There's also the home funding, which is a normal federal program that is aimed at creating housing and providing supportive services for those who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness. So you'll see here that we received $125 million in home funds, and specifically there's around $36 million that will be allocated to non-entitlement communities. So this can be a really great source of funding to build new housing for those who are currently in hotels or motels or experiencing homelessness. And finally, we have the Homeowner Assistance Fund. Massachusetts is eligible to receive around $178 million for their homeowner assistance fund, and it really helps to prevent any kind of foreclosures based on mortgage delinquencies or any kind of loss of utility or home energy services. These funds can be used to assist any kind of low-income homeowners that may be struggling during this time. And finally, on the next slide, as you may have heard, there's a lot of emergency rental assistance that is coming out to help renters pay their rent, as well as to help landlords access some of this funding to make sure that we can prevent evictions. So there's been a number of great state-run emergency rental assistance programs, including our normal ones such as RAFT, but also emergency rental assistance program, ERAP. There's also the subsidized housing rental assistance program, which is called SHIRA. And you can access all of these resources via DHCD's website. And I've provided a few links here for you to be able to get all the information that you need to access that resource. And then moving on to the last slide, the state has put together a housing resources and guidance page that has everything that you would need to know in terms of legal services that you can get to prevent evictions, again, rental assistance, and all of the guidance that the state has put out about how to use these funds. So please access that resource on their website if you have any questions. And as my colleague had mentioned previously, the way that you can get involved is by contacting your state legislators to support some of our housing priorities. We'll also be coming out with priorities for this federal funding, so you can support those priorities as well. And then for the funding that is coming to your local city and town, please reach out to your local municipal officials and decision makers to become part of the process. And then finally, you can join one of our CHAPA committees to have your voice heard and tell us about what you are facing locally, so that we can include some of those things in our policies. So with that, I'll kick it over to my colleague, Whitney.
Thanks so much, Ryan. As you guys can see, there's much to be excited about in the world of housing as we advocate for all of these issues. And so I'm also excited now as the Fair Housing Engagement Director at CHAPA, that we're really focusing on fair housing, where we always have obviously had that as part of our work, but really being more intentional in calling out our various efforts. And so on the next slide, I'm excited to share with you sort of this top-down sort of focus, refocusing right on fair housing. So the Biden administration in this framework of building back better in fair housing has done a number of things, three of which I hope to highlight here for us quickly. One, in redressing discrimination housing practices, sex discrimination, and some exciting news to share around affirmatively furthering fair housing. So on the topic of redressing our nation's history of housing discrimination, in January of this year, the Biden administration issued an executive order basically acknowledging the historical patterns of segregation and discrimination, and for us to take all steps necessary to conform those policies required under the Fair Housing Act. And so we're seeing some of the products of that coming out, some of which I'll talk about. On the next slide, there was a memo back in February on sex discrimination, which we're really excited about as well. Basically, this memo will enable that under the Fair Housing Act, prohibition of sex discrimination to also include discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So this is really important. Prior to that, the definition really only included sex discrimination as related to whether you're male or female. This goes a little bit further to also include LGBTQ plus individuals as well. So of course we have that sexual orientation protection in Massachusetts, but really, again, just to note, we're saying this sort of top-down sort of directive at the federal level. And more recently, there was published the restoring of the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule, which looks very similar to under the Obama administration. This interim final rule was published by the Biden-Harris administration, and there's a comment period on making comments around how it should look. And so we encourage you all in your advocacy to take a look at this interim rule, and certainly to consider the nuances there. So again, excited about the sort of top-down directive and restoring our attention around fair housing issues. And so I want to, it's my pleasure really to work alongside the CHAPA policy team as they have put together a fair housing legislative priorities sort of agenda, which includes exclusionary zoning, disparate impact, and affirmatively furthering fair housing. So these sort of package deals are really excited to be able to share with you all and hope that you all will come alongside us to really work to get it right and also to advocate. So the legislation working around exclusionary zoning, our sponsors, Rep. Barber and Senator Chang Diaz, will really work to prohibit restrictive land use zoning and permitting decisions that really perpetuate discrimination, right? That prohibits discrimination against affordable housing developments or housing that is suitable for families with children. And I know many of us have seen instances of this on the ground. So this legislation is hopefully to work to counter that. Additionally, we're looking at affirmatively furthering fair housing as well on the state level, right? This premise of whether or not we have that federally based off the administration or and their rulings. We are looking to do that on the state level. So sponsors Rep. Rogers and Santiago and Senator Boncory. This will really work to provide a statewide duty to affirmatively further and create inclusive communities. And then lastly, we have a disparate impact standard with sponsors Rep. Rogers and Senator Boncory, which will really work to create a statewide disparate impact standard to protect people against housing discrimination based off of policies and practices, whether despite what the intent might be, right? It may not be the intent to be discriminatory, but the impact on protected classes. And so being able to examine that as well on the state level. So excited for this sort of legislative agenda and hope that you will work alongside us. So we wanted to also highlight local level initiatives that folks can do on the local level in terms of cities and towns, right? Across the Commonwealth, there are fair housing commissions and committees and human rights commissions and diversity and inclusion officers and other like organizations and roles that are working to really address fair housing, which is really exciting. But again, some of those roles that they take on is education and outreach efforts, providing assistance for people who experience discrimination, local and state policy to promote open communities. And so we see this as really important. And as well in our Fair Housing Committee, which I'll talk about, we're hoping to try to start to map some of what is happening across the state in terms of fair housing. And so there's really been a huge focus and attention on that. We've shared in the chat some resources for individuals who might be interested in starting a fair housing commission or committee in their local city or town. So we want to make sure we share that with you all as a resource that MAPC has put together. And CHAPA Fair Housing Committee, we're excited, as my colleagues have talked about the various committees we have at CHAPA. We have now revitalized our Fair Housing Committee, and I must give a shout out to Bob Van Meter, who's on the call. We'll be talking a little bit later, who has been probing us for some time to really put our attention on this effort. So thank you, Bob. We and our group here, which he's part of, we meet periodically with a diverse group of stakeholders, right? So your role, unlike mine, may not be a fair housing advocate or what have you, but you're interested in those in that work. And so we invite you to join that effort. We're certainly looking to have various folks as part of that. So what you can do now, right? We're obviously going to give you a charge. You can certainly join a local effort. You can revitalize your local fair housing committees and commissions, right? You can be contacting your local municipal officials and decision makers, specifically around our fair housing agenda, right? Contact your state legislators. And certainly join the Fair Housing Committee. And so we've shared resources in the chat about that. And certainly if you would like to just dive in and learn more about fair housing, we invite you to check out our housing toolbox as well. I'll turn it over to Dana to now talk a little bit about the fair housing, the municipal engagement initiative at CHAPA, of which I'm also a part of. Thanks, Dana.
Thank you, Whitney. So briefly, just want to tell you a little bit about our municipal engagement initiative, which myself and Whitney and Lily work on, and many of you have worked with us on. It's a growing group of practitioners. Many of you, I'm sure, have seen the research out of BU by Catherine Einstein, David Glick, and Maxwell Palmer. But to boil it down, essentially, they were looking at comparing people who commented at public meetings about housing and voters, and they found that compared with those voters, commenters were disproportionately white, older, male, more likely to be homeowners. These trends persisted across all kinds of communities and really led to a inadequate supply of housing, particularly in highly desirable neighborhoods. This pushed more development into less affluent communities, which leads to gentrification and displacement. There's a really great report if you go to housingpolitics.com. We wanted to flip the script on what that was looking like in local communities. and see what we could do. And, you drive around your communities, you see signs like this everywhere you go. We don't want this. This is what we don't want. We can't have this. Too many kids in our schools, not enough parking, traffic, no, no, no. We wanted to flip the script and have lots of signs like this. We need more, protect, expand. Yes to affordable housing. But we know, and through the report and just through the work that we've done, that really community support can make or break housing at that local level. And so many communities just don't have a strategy or a coalition to build that local support. So that's where the Municipal Engagement Initiative comes in. We work to really support the efforts of communities to build this culture that is welcoming to housing, especially affordable housing, as opposed to saying, no, we don't want that. We bolster the efforts to expand opportunity in these communities and throughout the whole Commonwealth, and we're growing the number of people who support housing production in their communities. Another shout out to Bob Van Meter, who will be speaking in a minute, but with the group in Acton, that was our first municipal engagement initiative community. But we're now in, I think, over 15 communities that we have worked with directly. We have a lot more that come to us from places that we haven't worked with, but we're bringing them to connect with us. Every community starts somewhere different. You all have different starting points, circumstances, opposition, concerns. But we understand that all of you could do more around support for affordable housing. And so we really just try to create a unique experience that looks at what you're grappling with in your own community. To do this, we really identify a core of advocates at the local level. We start to build out the partners and think about folks who are not your usual suspects. This is a big tent model, so we want people who have typically talked about housing in communities, but we also want to go well beyond that. Veterans groups, disabilities groups, groups who care about transit and walkability and downtown economic viability and racial justice. We want all of those people in the room having these conversations. We dig into data. We have a launch event of some sort, hopefully a big one that brings a lot of energy, and we grow and we start to take actions as a group. We have a toolkit with lots of agendas and stakeholder lists and activities you can use to build your coalition in your local community. And you can also reach out to us. We have office hours that Lily holds if you want to learn more about what we do. And we also run some meetings, which I'll mention in a second. In the meantime, if you're not ready to start a coalition, I understand that. We'd love to help you do it. But there's a lot of things that you can be doing locally to kind of change the narrative and make our case for affordable housing and housing production locally. So definitely look at your local data. We always refer folks to MHP's Data Town tool. Really easy to look at what your town or city might be grappling with and compare to other places. Meet with your local planners and your elected officials to better understand the housing climate. Number one, which I like hide it in the middle of my bullets, but number one, show up to your public meetings and speak up for more housing and affordability. We know that opposition shows up and speaks up, and they never fail to miss a meeting. You have to do the same. Push back against myths and exclusionary language when people say things like, we can't do this because we don't have room in our schools. Dig into the data, push back, say, actually, we're a community that welcomes more people. We're a community that wants to do more. You can do educational forums. We'd be happy to help you with those. And really listen to people with the deepest affordability concerns in your community. The data from the BU report really shows that folks who are impacted by housing affordability are the least likely to be heard at these public forums. So reach out to these groups of folks, people who are more vulnerable, and ask for their engagement. So a bunch of links and ways to get engaged with us will go up in the chat, but please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us to see how you can get involved. And now I'm going to hand it off to our regional partners to hear what they're up to in their community. So we'll start off with Bob, who we've mentioned several times already, from Acton's Housing for All. Bob, if you want to go ahead, thanks.
Mute. Okay. Let's see. So can you hear me? I don't know if I'm on screen or not, but
You're all
uh,
set. Yep.
okay. So thanks Dana, and CHAPA has been a great resource for us since we started down this path about 3.5 years ago, I believe. So the pandemic year has been a year that it's been hard to grow our core of people because we're meeting by Zoom. At least we have been up until now. And, there have been issues that some of us in the leadership have had, which have meant that we actually haven't been able to meet every month, but we've kind of resumed activities at a higher level in January of this year. And the things that we've had recent success with, I'd like to describe a little bit. One, which we kind of picked up from our friends at Engine 6 in Newton, was doing a written questionnaire for candidates for local office. And so we did a fairly extensive questionnaire for a select board election that occurred in March. And then we publicized the answers to that on the Patch local website, and also in the print newspaper, the Beacon, which had a much smaller word limit, so we had to edit down the responses considerably. But that at least focused the candidates' attention on affordable housing issues. And then we had another select board election that just occurred yesterday. And in that case, we basically did the same questionnaire again. And then we held a Zoom candidate forum. And I want to give a shout out to my colleague at Acton Housing for All, Sahana Purahit, who moderated the candidate debate, and has also helped with the questionnaires and with publicizing our work through helping by creating a Facebook page, which we didn't have before. So both candidates showed up for a Zoom meeting. We recorded it. We then posted the recording on our Facebook page, and I think sent it around to other folks. And so, at least there was a substantial number of people that read the candidates' responses. Unfortunately, the candidate who I think was least responsive in the March election won, although neither candidate was a perfect advocate for affordable housing. But we're hoping that we're going to be able to educate both of our new select board members. So that's something new that we did this year. And at least the debate was made easier by doing it as kind of the first part of our Zoom regular monthly meeting. I think we have, as Dana talked about, kind of changing the overall tone. I think that has happened. We just had our regular Springtown meeting a week ago, late, of course, because of the pandemic. And although there wasn't a zoning change, there were some appropriations of CPA funds for affordable housing. And in the past, sometimes those appropriations have been controversial, and sometimes we've lost on them. And in this case, they were not. They didn't. They passed without anyone raising an objection. And then at a later point in the meeting, there was a warrant article to essentially have the town go fossil fuel free, and basically no new construction should have a fossil fuel connection. And somebody raised the objection to that wouldn't that hurt affordable housing, which was a funny objection to hear in that situation, and maybe indicated that people thought affordable housing was a good thing. It was a red herring, of course, and the select board member who was advocating the warrant article quickly responded to it, because the Housing Authority has a 40-unit development that is going to be built to the passive house standard. And so it was easy to point to an affordable housing development that was sustainable. I think it's clear that open space is still the mom and apple pie of local politics, though. The town meeting approved a $1.1 million easement for a 52-acre farm, but the part of the farm is actually close enough to the train station that it could have been designated as our, multifamily TOD district, and that really wasn't ever considered by the open space advocates. It was raised by one of our Housing for All members at town meeting, but the moderator had ruled out of order an amendment to that. So it engendered discussion, but not action at town meeting. And then I wanted to say that we've been kind of participating in a lot of education efforts, and I want to give a shout out to my colleagues at JALSA, the Jewish Alliance for Law and Social Action, that has been I've been working with as a consultant to develop housing discrimination history curriculum. So we were able to deliver that curriculum to the Jewish congregation here in Acton, but also a modified version of it to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Commission of the town. And I think that had a positive impact. They are interested in co-sponsoring a fair housing event with housing groups in Acton in the fall. And I think in the process of doing that education, you find out things in people that you wouldn't have before, like stories about civil rights activism on housing issues in the 60s. In those presentations, I found the most compelling numbers that I was able to come up with were, one, the MCBIC numbers on how many people bought homes in 2017. One African-American purchaser in 2017 in Acton, about 400 purchasers who were white and Asian. The other compelling number was the looking at the percentage of town that's zoned single family. Obviously, people have been using that in other places. So we had 77% of the town as of right single family, 3% as of right multifamily, 400 acres. And in contrast to the multifamily as of right, 1,600 acres of protected open space in town. Finally, I just want to mention that we are collaborating with the Acton Climate Coalition to sponsor an event reaching out to renters on energy issues and getting them involved in climate. And it's interesting because we've never done systematic work to reach out to renters. And Acton, in contrast to some suburban communities, has a significant amount of multifamily housing built in the 60s. So close to 30% of the housing units are multifamily, probably 25% of the households are renters. So reaching those people around energy and the fact that they really can't take advantage of many of the energy efficiency and renewable energy programs is a priority right now. And we're hoping to have a large turnout of tenants in mid-July at an event, and continue working with the Acton Climate Coalition and a national organization called Climate Mobilization. So I'll stop there. Sorry.
That's great, Bob. Thank you. And especially on that last point, I think I'm thinking back to at the beginning when people were saying what they're excited about, and someone mentioned they were excited about how climate and housing are really coming together as partners in a lot of this work. And then you can see on top of it, climate, housing, and renter engagement, seeing all of those things come together in one effort. I'm excited to see how that works in Acton and hopefully replicate in some of our other communities. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Jen Van Kampen from Metro West Collaborative Development to share some of the things they've been working on.
Great, thanks, Dana. So Metro West Collaborative Development is a regional community development corporation. We do three things. We build affordable housing, we advocate for affordable housing, and we connect people to it. And of course, during the pandemic, that last one took up most of our time as people went from, gainfully employed to having zero income. I mean, that's, you know, for a lot of us here today, we may not appreciate that kind of cliff. But over the last year, we've worked with literally hundreds of families for whom that was the case. You know, they went to work on a Friday and said, don't come back. And we don't know when you're coming back, and we don't know if you're going to get unemployment. We just don't know. So we were part of the groups that put together some of the emergency rental assistance programs that were operated through local, in many cases, Community Preservation Act funds. We distributed over $5 million to over 500 households in 7 different municipalities. And, you know, I think the keys for success in a lot of those were working with strong local partners, you know, food pantry staff, you know, church folks, school systems. A lot of people worked really hard with us, reaching the most vulnerable members of their community and really helping put together applications. And it was tough stuff. So working with those local folks was really key. Doing anything and everything we could to overcome language and technology barriers, right? Because the libraries were closed and you couldn't go to Staples to make a copy of your W-2 anymore. And so that was challenging stuff. And as a result, I think the primary key to success was just being super, super flexible. We were very proud of our success rates, getting most of our applicants through the system, but it took a lot of creativity and flexibility on everyone's parts. I think that while that was all awesome, and clearly there's still a lot of resources to come at the federal and state level, we are talking about a lot of folks whose jobs are gone forever, right? There's some structural unemployment, especially at the very low wage end of the spectrum, that may or may not come back. And we have a lot of households that are just completely broke. You know, we're talking about not only broke, but they went and borrowed money and they ran up their credit cards. And that's going to have a lot of implications on our rental housing market for the next few years, right? Because we're going to have this giant cohort of people who have terrible credit scores and are in a lot of debt. And as an owner and operator of affordable housing, I'm not really going to want to take a risk on those folks, but I have to, right? We all are going to be called to provide greater support and greater opportunity for folks because there's a lot of people who are going to be in that position. On the plus side, or on the positive side looking forward, I totally agree with Bob that I think there are a lot of great synergies out there and some exciting work happening at the very local level. I will share on behalf of the town of Stowe, for those of you who may or may not have followed it, they had a really interesting master planning zoning issue at their town meeting, and it won, and that means that 151 acres of land will be preserved for open space, but there will also be 189 units of housing developed on a former golf course. So that was a big lift for the housing advocates in that town, and they were successful. The other thing I just would maybe mention, many towns are looking at municipal-owned land, state-owned land, institutional-owned land, and those are all exciting opportunities, especially coupled with all of this federal development money that may be coming. Like, now's really the time to get your project idea more fully baked, so that when the line, you know, or when the window opens up, you've got your project ready to go. And my final 2 cents, would be that don't think small, right? We get calls all the time from housing advocacy groups that want us to take a look at a site, and they're thinking, this could be 4 or 6 units. And I almost always say, or 20 or 30 units, right? Like, it's just as much political lift in many places to get 4 units as it is to get 18. It's the same length of time to get it through your zoning process. So why not, shoot for the moon? So with that, it's back to Dana. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. And thank you for all the work you have done over the last year. Your organization quite literally kept people in their homes. And as we all know, the connection with housing and health right now save people's lives. So, thank you for that. And for all of the opportunity that we see going forward. And our last regional partner, but not our least, Liz Rust from the Regional Housing Services Organization. Thank you.
Yes, hi, thank you, Dana. I really applaud CHAPA and for all this excellent presentation and all these materials, and even hearing my fellow presenters. I think this has been really a great information sharing. There's a lot going on and much to be excited about for sure. I also am part of another regional housing group in Metro West, and there are 9 communities that we service. And so the impacts of COVID are still very much being felt in our area. Delays all round, especially in all round, from financing and pre-construction and construction, developments that we have a number of developments that were committed before the pandemic and all set to kind of go forward, and then construction exploded and having to go back and recommit and obtain more funding. And that's really at the state level, DHCD, Mass Housing, all the way to the local level and the private lenders. And going back and rebidding the projects and re-estimating, 30% increase, 33% increase, trying to find new subsidies to fill those gaps, and then going back again, and then it's a volatile construction budget planning. We had one project, it was just a single family home, an affordable single family home, and it went from $450,000 to $600,000 on a little piece of town-owned land that they gave the housing authority, and it was just kind of like a little no-brainer kind of thing. And now it's should we even do it? Should we even do it? And that's very expensive for 1 unit of housing. So we're also seeing delays of up to 12 months in building schedules. So projects that were permitted, people lined up through lotteries, all set to go, and lumber, steel, flooring, appliances, all of those. So people sort of on the brink of ready to move, and big delays there. But in general, we find it's a really active market. We've seen a huge spike in the volume of home ownership resales, up over 100% in 1 year. So in looking at why that is, some folks closer to extended family, others moving into market or unrestricted home, others needing to sell for financial issues, and others just moving for lifestyle, moving further away from the city. But it's really just been a very active market, and the interest in affordable housing lotteries is very strong. So we see a lot of educated and ready buyers. So you really have, all ends of the spectrum. I mean, people, the uncertainty and the vulnerability in some of the rental, and then the home ownership side is. So hearing about all the federal housing resources today was great. That was really exciting. We also had a local ERAP program in 5 communities. And so we're really just wrapping that up, use, CPA funds, but with all of the new funding sources, referring people to those. And that's good. So we're looking forward to these new federal funds. We understand the eviction protections are coming up, terminating in August. So we're wondering about that. And also we're expecting the rent increases to come forward. I know that that's very active at the state level, and that DHCD and Mass Housing are working very hard on that to manage that, but it's a 15% increase from the 2019, which were the last rental increases, to the 2021. And when that comes and those leases get renewed, I mean, that's just going to be a really big impact on top of all the things that we've talked about. So we're really looking at that and seeing what's going to happen. I know that some things are in the works at the state level, so that's good. We do see municipalities taking efforts and porting forward new zoning, taking advantage of the housing choice legislation, as well as doing some capacity building, establishing housing trusts, proposing developments, as Jennifer mentioned, looking at town-owned land. So there is more interest in that. And we also see increased interest in fair housing education and guidance. Really excited about the work that CHAPA is doing in that area. And we see that really at all the municipal levels, and even some municipal leadership. So that's very welcome, and looking forward to continuing on those efforts in the communities that we support. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Liz. As you're speaking, it strikes me the breadth of the work that you guys do, and also how quickly, because you had kind of a collaboration among communities, how quickly you were able to pivot to serving them during the last year, all of the changes and the new opportunities that come forward. So really thank you for all of that, and for sharing some of the challenges and opportunities you're facing. So now we have a little bit of time left to hear from all of you. I've been checking the chat. I don't see a lot of questions there. So what I'll do is just open it up to you for discussion. We want to hear from you. What are the challenges and opportunities that you're excited about? Some of the themes that we've been thinking about a lot recently that you've heard mentioned on this call that I'd love to hear from all of you are, the connections that we're all making between housing and healthcare, housing and racial justice, housing and the climate goals that we're setting, especially in the midst of this historic heat wave. So what are you all doing? What are you concerned about? What could you use more resources on? Any questions you have, I'll open it up. Feel free to raise your virtual hand or just unmute yourself, and we'll go from there. And if it's feeling like a quiet group, I can start calling on people. I don't want to do that. Joan, did you want to speak? Sorry, I couldn't tell if you raised your hand or not. Oh, do you want me to call on you? It's quiet. Is everyone too hot? What are folks? Oh, go ahead, Joan.
In the great silence.
You saved me.
Yeah. I think, Brookline, Building a Better Brookline started out as a coalition of multiple constituencies, racial justice, environmental, transportation. We're not now adding health, public health. And one of the things that's, I think, at least I'm giving thought and consideration and feel like I'm wrestling with is there's a bit of a tension between doing organization building things and doing actual housing or climate or racial justice actions. And so trying to find the time to do some of the things that will keep the coalition vibrant and together, which are a little bit more internal, even if it's educating climate people to the housing issues or vice versa, or showing how, racial justice and transportation are, key pieces of this puzzle. you know, it's just, people are so spread thin and maxed out, and summer and hot and COVID and that we're really having a real wrestle to try and prioritize what are the things that we must do in sort of both camps, both the organization building, and which to me is part of the power building. You know, holding a coalition together isn't easy under any circumstances. And the agendas that each of the constituencies have for their issues.
Getting things done. Yeah.
And so, you know, we thought, you know, we need a retreat, you know, for the core group to kind of figure out how to manage it all. And, you know, but who has time in the summer for a retreat? So that's kind of one of the things on our plate that we're wrestling with.
Yeah, I might go to Bob to see what he thinks on this from a coalition perspective. I will offer one thing that others on the call might be interested in, because you mentioned something about educating folks about affordable housing. We do offer an affordable housing 101 session generally monthly. We might skip a month here or there because of holidays and stuff.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
So I'm sure Lily is pulling up the link as we speak to put in the chat, but we'd love to have people join us for that. It's really, because I hear this from folks a lot. Well, I'm not a housing expert, and I really try to push back on that. You may not know the lingo, but if you've ever lived in a house, if you are in the Metro West region, the greater Boston region in general, you are a housing expert. Have you ever rented, bought in this market, in this world? You are an expert, and we want half of the work we want to do is elevate that importance of that lived experience.
Yep.
So as far as learning the lingo and the terms and the alphabet soup, we can help out with that. But I'll let Bob answer your question about or I'll let him try to answer the question about the action versus the coalition building.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't gone so far as to have a leadership retreat yet, but maybe we will at some point in the next 6 months. I think having events where people can interact socially, whether it's on Zoom or in person. I mean, there was an in-person coffee for a select board candidate, and that was an opportunity to meet a couple of people who had started coming to our meetings via Zoom, but who I had never met in person before. And so I think those kinds of things are helpful, and maybe you know, having a picnic at Lars Anderson Park for your building a better Brookline might be a good thing, at least when it's not 90 degrees.
Right.
We have one of our groups is on the Cape is just about to launch their coalition work, and they are going to do the coalition meeting on Zoom, and then the following week they're going to have an outdoor happy hour to do some of that, get to know each other, and like, now that you've mulled over the topics we've talked about, let's chat about them, and some of that informal connection that's happening. So as things are opening up and people are feeling more comfortable being in spaces with each other, I think that's a really great idea, Bob. So other questions, concerns, strategies, or challenges you all are facing? What are folks seeing as, are your town meetings or your city councils taking up issues of affordable housing that you're concerned about or want to work on? Or maybe there's some fair housing issues you're grappling with in your community? It's very quiet. Fair housing concerns, Whitney saying. Let me do this. I know it's a quiet group, so I'm going to give you some of the closing remarks, and we can go early. And also, please chat with us outside of this meeting if you can. But we do have a couple of things coming up that I'd love for you all to hear about. If you haven't yet signed up for our housing briefs, please do. You can join one of our committees. As we said, just yesterday, we had a great meeting about ARPA funds. There's going to be a lot coming down the line, as Ryan mentioned, about how that's being spent. I will reiterate the point that I made yesterday and that Ryan mentioned. It's a real opportunity. I think we should see all of the concentration and emphasis on housing that has emerged over the last year and in the last few months as a real opportunity to do some of the things we've been saying we want to do for a long time. So many of you have local housing production plans, local master plans, local analysis of impediments to fair housing or affirmatively furthering fair housing plans. Look at those and think about what are the things you've been wanting to do and you haven't been able to. As Jen asked you, like, dream bigger. What are the things that you put on your to-do list in your local community that you haven't been able to? And talk to your local officials about how can you make that commitment of something like 20% of your funds that are coming into your community to achieve those housing goals. How can we do better as we go forward, as opposed to going back to our business as usual, which we know wasn't really working for so many of us. So think about that. Lean on us to assist you with that. Definitely let us know if you're interested in starting a coalition, coming to our Making the Case calls or our Affordable Housing 101, and joining our other committees through our policy team. Similarly to what I was saying, people say I'm not a housing expert, or that's not my area of expertise. Actually, it is. We want your voices at these committee meetings. It's where we learn the most from your communities. So we would love to have you join us in those conversations. So I see another comment in the chat. Okay. Oh, Whitney saying, as Jen said, the time is now. Yes, the time is now. Yeah, concerns about educating the public about what affordable is and what it isn't, implementing the MBTA community density in an area that doesn't have robust transit service, and educating the public is a tale as old as time. Yeah, this is an interesting point. I don't know, Rachel, what community you're from, but we have had this question come up that the MBTA the MBTA requirements are for communities. You saw the broad map of where it covers, and not all of them have a T stop or a commuter rail stop within them. And so I don't know if Abi or Ryan is on and can speak to this more, or Eric, I believe all of that is coming in the guidance, but there are going to be feedback loops over the summer to hear from communities about what that might look like in the community. And definitely on the education piece, like I said, coming to our Affordable Housing 101 is step one, but then Bob has been part of educational forums within his community. Joan mentioned the ones that they've done in their community. It's a kind of a constant need to do education around what do we mean when we say affordable housing. Many of our communities do things like give an example of the kinds of salaries that you're talking about, because you say 80% of area median income. What does that even mean? Well, is it someone who works at the daycare center in town? What might they be able to afford? So really making it personal to folks. Yeah, and Bob raised a point in the chat. Making the Case and Dr. Tiffany Manuel are really helpful in thinking about how we communicate. So our Making the Case calls really are about how do we not just do the education, but how do we pull people into this conversation and make them want to be part of the solution, as opposed to opposition. And you had a question here about, or a comment mentioning the need for a regional renter buyer contact list for units coming available over the next few years. Liz, do you guys have anything like that through RHSO, folks who are interested in buying units?
Well, I think it's both sides. It's being in touch with the owners. So as the owners are thinking about selling, because that process usually goes on for a year plus before they actually say they're going to sell, like what would it be worth? How does the process work? And with, in real estate in general, people are looking for, I have to sell before I can buy, and I don't want to get temporary housing. So I'd like to sell it and buy it all in the same day. And so just trying to work through that timeline and then so being in touch with the owners is part of any ownership program, so that they know who to call and a resource to talk to. And then also to people who are looking to have an interest list, both on the ownership side as well as the rental side. And on the rental side, to be able to provide some good referrals. And I know that Housing Navigator, I don't think you talked about Housing Navigator.
No, we haven't. That's great.
Yeah,
Thank you
so
for
is
raising it.
a rental resource coming up like in the sometime this calendar year, populated with the rental housing opportunities, where it's a nice user interface that people can go in to look at where there are housing vacancies or opportunities.
Yeah, and Whitney just shared the Housing Navigator link in the chat. I do know that some cities and towns do kind of have a database. So as people contact them and say they're interested in housing opportunities, they keep a database of folks who have been interested in and put the word out. The Housing Navigator is also going to be a very easily searchable place. So we're going to, hopefully everyone in the whole state is going to be referring folks there and make it a much simpler process, as Liz was saying, for people to both sell and rent places, but also for people to find a place that they're looking to buy or rent. So thanks for pointing that out. I see another comment here, Debbie saying she's hearing concerns about the conflict between deed restricted affordable housing and the need/desire for low-income families to build wealth through equity. Absolutely. I think that was part of this morning's conversation through the Greater Boston Housing Report Card. It's conversations we've been having at CHAPA when we talk about fair housing. I don't know, Debbie, if you want to speak any more to the kinds of concerns you're hearing. I think that we could do a whole day session on this topic alone, but I want to echo that we are hearing those concerns as well, especially for families or households of color and low-income households to build wealth when they have traditionally been shut out of those opportunities. So I don't know, Debbie, if you want to unmute and speak to that a little bit further.
Sure. Thank you, Dana. It really is just some pushback that we've received from some applicants who are saying that yes, they're interested in our homeownership opportunities, but if there are deed restrictions, that's not solving their long-term problem. And especially as we're trying to address specifically issues around segregation and fair housing. And then the pushback, how is it fair housing if the solution to years of segregation policies is that now the properties that they are able to access will have these restrictions on them, and it still restricts the ability to gain that equity over time. So there is some equity growth, but it's not at the same rate, it's not at market rate. And how do we it's a difficult question to answer.
Yeah, I think that's, as you said, the closing line there, it's a difficult question to answer. I really appreciate you raising that, Debbie, and we will at CHAPA be continuing to have these conversations with our partners as well. Anyone else want to speak to that or to any other concerns or challenges you're having locally? Liz, do you hear those kinds of concerns, or Jen, do you hear those kinds of concerns when you're doing your for sale opportunities?
Sure, of course, because limiting the resale value is, a particular concern for many people buying in. I think there's a couple of things that we talk about was, over time, you're paying down your mortgage. It has like forced savings. And so you build equity that way. And then the income limits do increase over time. We see that, but it's not, it's interesting the way things have worked out with the resale price methodology. Resales are much lower price than new affordable units in the same community, just because of the interplay with the income limits over time. So there's some inequity there, and that's just the multiplier and all of that, of how that works. I do know that the home program, right, allows a reasonable rate of return. But once you go past the affordability limit, then you're not going to be eligible for the state's subsidized housing inventory, which is a big concern for many municipalities and a requirement for a lot of different kinds of funding. So some of the funding sources will require certain kinds of restrictions. So it's a complex issue, as you mentioned.
And go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, I would just add that we probably can't address all of these public policy goals with one thing, which is what we're trying to do. And that doesn't feel possible to me. It's why as an organization, we don't actually develop affordable deed restricted home ownership, because we think there are so many boxes that it kind of puts people into that it's often not the best situation for them. So I think it's important, and I'm very hopeful that you guys are on it. And as the governor pumps $500 million into the system, that smart people are kind of trying to figure this out.
Yeah, I think, and Whitney shared a link to the second panel from our fair housing event, which I mentioned we had in April, really tried to address these issues that you're raising there, Debbie. So if you didn't get a chance to join us, please do take a look at that. And yeah, I think this is a continuing conversation. Rachel also mentioned information on community land trust versus the housing trust versus the land trust. Yeah, this is the alphabet soup I was talking about. We do cover that. I feel like I'm an infomercial for our Affordable Housing 101 session, but we do cover that in our Affordable Housing 101 sessions. But I think, yeah, we often throw around the idea of a trust, but what does that actually mean? So an affordable housing trust is an entity that, its purpose, it's a special municipal organization or committee that's purpose is for affordable housing. Then you have a land trust, which really acquires property to do, it could be for affordable housing or it could be for other things. And then you had a community land trust, and sometimes that's trust for open space. There can be all different kinds of things. So we do definitely go into that in more depth in Affordable Housing 101. But yeah, these are a lot of different things. And I think what it speaks to is how many tools we have at our disposal to do this kind of work. Another kind of plug for the Housing Toolbox, which will have a in-depth, if you can't make it to our session, there's a lot of in-depth information about each of these concepts on there, and links and reports on how to get to the next level of education on each of them as well. All right, any other questions or comments? Otherwise, I think we'll close this out and just thank you once again for being here with us. Thanks again to Jen and Liz and Bob and all of the CHAPA staff for presenting, and to all of you for being here today. And have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.